Sometimes good intentions are not enough. Can I tell you a funny story? There was a Christian school that was attached to a church, and they had brought in a new head of school. And one of the things he was trying to turn around was just the staff culture. It was not really great. A lot of times it was dysfunctional. And so he was coming in vibrant, young, lots of ideas, lots of energy. And they had a teacher in service one day. And he said, I want everybody to be ready. We're going to go for a surprise outing. Now, I need you to know that the team of teachers that he had were in their, 40s and 50s and 60s. And so they all gathered around the flagpole, and he said, today we're going to have a fun day, and everyone's getting really excited. And he said, we're going to a trampoline park. And if you could see the looks on the faces of these ladies, one of them looked at me at the time and said, does he know that I've had 4 children and jumping on a trampoline is not the greatest? They weren't prepared. They didn't have their tennis shoes. They weren't ready. It's interesting because sometimes the culture is the thing that we are trying to fix. In fact, what we have a heart for with pastoral transitions is we believe truly that if we had a better culture, if we actually were very intentional about how we set up things with our staff, not just on the way in and the onboarding, but obviously we're really a lot about what happens on the offboarding, that these things matter. Culture matters. And believe it or not, you have to do more than just do a trampoline park run and a pizza lunch. There's an operating system and there's intentionality that comes with it. And that's why we wanted to have a conversation with culture expert. Let me introduce you to Jenni Catron. She is a culture strategist. She's a leadership expert, and she's an author and the founder of Foresight Group, the Foresight Group. And there she is equipping leaders to build thriving, healthy organizational cultures. Now, she's been doing this for more than 20 years, and she has experience in business, ministry, nonprofit sectors, but she wants leaders to be able to understand that great cultures, they don't just happen by accident. They are built intentionally. Now, she has insights on leadership and culture that have inspired thousands of leaders to get their teams aligned, to be able to grow their organizations and to create a lasting impact. We're so excited to start off, and make sure you listen all the way to the very end because there are some things, there's some calls to action that actually, if you don't, one of them is happening tomorrow. In fact, let me just let you know that there is something called the Culture Matters Summit. It's taking place tomorrow, which would be January 23rd in the great year of our Lord 2025. So if you're listening to this afterwards, you missed it, but there's still great resources. We want to let you know about it. And Jenni and her group have so much to offer. So as we kick off, this is season 4 of the Life After Ministry podcast. Buckle up. Thanks for listening. Let's go. Jenni Catron, welcome to the Life After Ministry podcast.
Matt, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. We're going to talk about culture. And from our perspective at Pastoral Transitions, we get to talk about the backside of culture where things don't necessarily go well. Sometimes it's the culture problem that actually had somebody leave or they got themselves out all on their own. But this is a really big topic. And I want to look at this from a number of different ways, but why and how did this start for you? Why did you start to focus in on, we got to pay attention to culture?
Yeah. I was kind of an accident, if I'm really honest. I, just by nature, I'm a very driven A-type personality, high achiever, wants to make things happen. And I kind of bumped into this idea that people really are the point. And it occurred to me after, if I rewind, I was in ministry for a number of years, but my first job out of college was in the record business in Nashville. This was my dream job. Since I was like a 13-year-old, I wanted to work for a record company in Nashville. Well, I landed the job, and I actually was a part of an amazing team. Like my first job post-college, amazing team, fantastic leaders, like high level of responsibility, high accountability, clear communication. Like we knew what was expected of us. We were working hard, but we were really aligned around our mission as a team. So fantastic experience. And I spent 8 years in that division of the company. And then they merged us with another division. So we went through this corporate merger. And overnight, my experience went from amazing, like loving my job, loving the team, loving the work that we do, to absolutely loathing it. Like, and my job description had not changed. My job responsibilities had not changed, but my leader had changed and my team had changed. And the circumstances were just radically different. And I remember thinking, Matt, I was like, why do I hate going to work? Like, why is this all of a sudden so miserable? And I just began to like try to diagnose that and make sense of it. And I lasted about a year. It didn't really get much better. In the meantime, I was recruited to come on staff at the church my husband and I were a part of. We had helped plant a church in the Nashville area, and it was growing pretty rapidly. And so I was invited on staff as the executive director. And I remember thinking very distinctly, I thought, I have just come off the heels of a really bad work experience after having been a part of a really amazing team. And I thought, I want everybody who works for me to have the first experience and not the latter. Like, if I can be a part of helping shape the culture for a team and for an organization where great people want to be a part of it, they're engaged, they're using their gifts, they're building connection, we're seeing the mission happen. Like, if I can create that, what an opportunity. And so that's kind of my first memorable moment of why culture matters so much, is that I had experienced it. I'd experienced a really amazing culture and I'd experienced a really not so great culture. And I just became intensely committed to saying, I know that you can work hard, you can be a part of a fantastic mission, and it can be a great experience. And so I just became committed to figuring that out.
So we're not helpless in this conversation about building a healthy culture. It's not like a nature versus nurture where you just have great people with great chemistry. What do you do if it's actually not great people, not great chemistry? Like you help people, organizations, businesses, nonprofits, churches help to build this culture that is great, even if they don't have it, even if the chemistry is not there. So
Not there.
is it possible to change culture?
Yeah, great question. And absolutely, I believe it's possible to change culture. Now, is it easy? Not necessarily. It kind of depends on where you are. And the challenge is that most leaders leave culture to chance. And what I mean by that is most of us have a sense of what we want to create, the environment we want to create. And the more senior you are in the organization, the more influence you have over the culture and the experience, at least that you're having. And so and because we think of culture as, people, which it is, people are what shape your culture. We think relationships, and especially in the church, we're typically pretty highly relational. And so when I say we leave culture to chance, we leave culture to chance because we kind of expect that everybody will get it. They will get what's important to us. They will get how we do things here. They will get just this sense of who we are and how we want to work together. That's my definition of culture, is who we are and how we work together. And so we expect that everybody gets it. And that kind of works if you're a small team. If there's 5 of you, everybody can be around the table, everybody's a part of every decision, then you catch from the senior leader what's important here, right? Like, you catch it and you mimic it. Everything rises and falls on leadership, John Maxwell says. And so we catch whatever that is from our leader. As soon as your team grows and expands, and if you're in ministry, you might only have a handful of staff, but you've probably got dozens, if not hundreds of volunteers, and they're all culture carriers. And so it is not possible for all of them to be in proximity to you as the leader and to just know what's important to you and to what you value and how you want everybody to engage. It's impossible. And so the thing that catches most leaders by surprise is that culture, like every other major ministry initiative, needs a system. Like, culture needs an operating system. It needs intentionality. And so what I really began to unpack over the last 20 years since I took that job at the church that I was a part of was a framework around, okay, how do you develop culture? And, so there's 5 parts to the framework where we're assessing, where are we now? Just What's our reality? What's our current way of how we operate as a team? And then the second key piece to answer your question is we need to define what we aspire to. Like, leaders intuitively know it, but if you haven't clearly communicated that to the rest of the team, you're
Yeah.
leaving it to chance. You're leaving it to their interpretation of what we want the environment to be and feel like. And so that definition piece is really, really key, because in a lot of cases, I intuitively know if something feels right to me, but I don't know always how to articulate that. I had one leader who was particularly the aesthetics and the look of their church mattered a lot to this particular leader.
Yeah.
And his staff would get so frustrated because he would come in and like rearrange furniture, or, if they had repainted a room and he didn't like the color of the walls, like he had a strong opinion about it. And they never felt like they could really pinpoint, like, we just feel like he just likes to rearrange things. Well, the deal was that he actually really cares about aesthetics, and they've never unpacked that. So they weren't bringing him into the right discussions, or involving him in the right places, or learning more about what is it that's really important to you. Why are you moving that chair from here to here? Well, he had a whole reason, because it was about how people connected. It sounds silly, but it's that kind of stuff when there's a lack of clarity, team members are just kind of, poking around trying to figure out, well, what am I supposed to do and how do I do it? And if I lack that clarity, it's really frustrating for me as a team member.
So where do we go wrong? I'm sure that some people, this conversation is not even on their radar whatsoever, and I think there's some people that say, well, we have a ping pong table, we have free coffee, it's Keurig, or we got the really nice espresso machine, but there's certain things I think some leaders are thinking we've checked the box, and they say that's good culture, and we're missing. I remember going on
Mm.
a pastor's retreat. Our team went on a retreat, and we were playing softball. And I got to be one of the coaches for the team. I got to pick my team and all that. And I realized very quickly that we were not doing very well. And the other team was killing us. And the culture on that side, like everybody on my team was hating life. We were throwing gloves. It was like pastors wanting to cuss, and it was not pretty. And but I felt like, well, we did like a little huddle before we went out in the field, like every time, like we came back, like there was this moment of like, all right, we could do this, like hands in, like 1, 2, 3, go team, right?
Mhm.
And we said like
Mhm.
that's culture, but we were getting killed, and we didn't like
Right.
it, and the culture felt horrible. Like, so where do we miss it? Like, what are the
Mm.
plug and play things that we're doing? We think like we're doing culture, and it's just not
Yeah.
working.
Yeah, great question. Because we do tend to think that culture is the fun stuff and the perks, and
Mhm.
fun days and things like that. And those are a part of it, but that's not really, in my opinion, at the heart of shaping culture. At the heart of shaping culture is this clarity of who we are and how we work together, like that deep knowing of, okay, here's who we are. This is our mission. This is our vision. Um, and this is what makes us distinct as an organization. This is what makes us distinct as a church, and how we reach the community, differently from everybody else. Like every person on the team knowing this is who we are. This is the distinctiveness for us as a ministry. Secondly, how we work together. So how do we work together? Like, what are those values, beliefs, and behaviors? And we've all talked about values, and values need a whole reframing, because we sometimes will find a handful of words that sound really good, or we saw on another church wall somewhere and say, oh, those sound good. No, your values are very distinct to you. Like I talked about that pastor who, aesthetics and the feel and the experience mattered to him. Well, that's a value that needed to be elevated, because everybody on the team needed to know that was really distinct to who they were as a team. So leaders have to get really clear on, this is who we are and how we work together. What are the values that shape us? What are the beliefs behind those values? What are the behaviors? How does it look when we express it? And so if I'm diagnosing your baseball team, it's like you probably didn't have a clear set of values going into the game of, hey, win or lose, this is how we do it together, right? Because if that was clear, and I realize it was kind of an episodic team for the moment, right? But if that was clear, you guys would have gone into it going, hey, our value is just to have fun, So then losing wouldn't have mattered so much, right? And I'm not saying that's the right value, but if that had been a value of like, hey, we want everybody to play, we want everybody to have fun, want everybody to get a chance to hit the ball. Like if you had defined those things before going into it, then losing wouldn't have probably felt quite as painful. But if you had defined ahead of time of like, hey, win at all costs, or we want to be excellent, we're great players and we want to give our best, or whatever you've defined, then your approach to the outcome or your response to the outcome would have been different. And so leaders really need to recognize that you need a foundation of that clarity of who we are and how we work together. There's a tool that I outline in the framework called the culture hierarchy of needs. So you're probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, that we have the basic needs that we have that must be met: food, water, shelter, clothing, before we can coffee, right?
Yeah.
Deeply flourish as humans. Well, the same thing is true organizationally, that there are needs that employees have. And the upper part of the hierarchy is things like connection and belonging and the things that we assume are culture. But the lower parts of the hierarchy are things like, I need a clear sense of the mission. I need to know my role. Where do I fit in the organizational structure? What am I responsible for? Who am I accountable to? And the more clarity I have on like what's expected of me and how we work together, then the more confidently I contribute, and the more the connection, the belonging, the fulfillment stuff happens. And that's the thing we missed oftentimes as leaders, is that we hope for these kumbaya, everybody loves everybody, we're connecting, we're having fun, we're doing all the things that are really an outcome of good culture. And we miss the things that we can provide, the clarity we can give, that gives team members a sense of confidence in how they contribute to the organization.
Yeah. There's a guy out in the marketing world. His name's Eugene Schwartz, and he talks about 5 stages of awareness, going from totally unaware to most aware. But you go from this point of like, I didn't even know that we had a culture problem, to I'm aware that there is a problem, to there's actually a solution to this problem. And then we start looking at, well, what are the various solutions till we actually make a decision on how we want to do this. But that step of going from we have a problem, but we actually haven't really ever talked about this. That first step of like, how do you sit down with your team and say things are going to start looking different, right? Like we're going to drop the fig leaf, and we're going to, because there's going to be, even if they have a bad culture right now and they want a good culture, there's some people that are going to like change of any kind, even if it's towards something good, we have resistance. So how do you actually like take that first step and like get people onboarded and sell the idea?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And you're right. Like it's at least the culture they know. So they're like, well, if we're here, we've been operating in it. We've learned how to survive in it. The one comment I would make about that, Matt, is that your staff are probably more ready for the discussion than you are. And here's why. Culture is usually not as good as we think it is as leaders. So what I often find is, I'm working with a lot of senior leaders, and they often think, well, I think it's fine. Like until there's like dramatic, like high turnover or, really toxic behavior somewhere, most leaders tend to think it's good because they're familiar with the experience. They're comfortable with the experience because they're disproportionately shaping the experience. And so the tough truth we have to hear as leaders is that our culture probably isn't as good as we think. And if we need to just put our curiosity hat on to say, okay, what's the experience like for the rest of the team? Like, how do they feel about our culture? And it's likely that they're more ready to have a discussion about it than you are. Now, that may not always be true, but it's what I find to be consistently true. So what I find is that most teams are very excited to have the conversation because, again, they want to be a part of an environment they enjoy contributing to, especially in ministry. I mean, people are on our teams because they deeply believe in the mission of what we do. They deeply believe in the importance of sharing the gospel. Like, they've intentionally gotten into ministry because for a very compelling why. Now we need to help them see like their place in helping us make that happen. So what I find is that team members are usually pretty receptive to it unless they think the leader won't want to hear the truth. So this puts a lot of onus on us if we're in the more senior leadership seats to say, we need to create an environment where people feel comfortable telling us the truth about our culture. And there's going to be good things and there's going to be not so good things. And it doesn't matter, like there's no perfect culture because there's no perfect people. And so every culture has room for improvement. So even if your culture feels good to you, my encouragement is, hey, have the conversation. We encourage surveys because I think surveys just help every person contribute at an equal level. You mostly will hear from, the loudest voices. We all know that, especially in ministry, the loudest voices find their way to us. But if you do a staff survey and you give them an opportunity to everybody kind of equally share, ideally in an anonymous way. I know a lot of times we don't like anonymous feedback, but it's a good first step to hearing the experience that our team members are having. And if they sense that you really do want to hear, they will give you good feedback, and it's gold. Like it's absolute gold for you as a leader to get that feedback, because then you know where you are. So that's the assessment phase of the work, is like, hey, we know where we are. Here's where we are in the map. And then I can say, okay, where do we want to go? And now I'm equipped to build a plan to go from A to B.
Yeah. It's opening that up. I think maybe a bit of resistance, but I'd be curious to hear what you think about it. Is resistance from a leader makes it feel like I have all of the responsibility to make this happen. But what it sounds like is you're trying to bring people along, and everybody has ownership in it.
That's
Ultimately,
right.
there is an ownership that comes from leadership. But if we're saying we're all in this together, we want to have that conversation together. It becomes a little less intimidating. But you
That's right.
typically, in most organizations, I recently got to be connected with a guy named Will Guidara, who wrote a book called Unreasonable Hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about how in like corporate restaurant world, you have the people who are corporately have all the power, and then you have the people who are actually in the restaurant, front of house, and they have all the knowledge. And what does it look like to actually bring those two together so that we can actually build a different kind of culture? Is a fascinating thing. Do you have success stories from this? Because I think what we think, I think, and I was in executive leadership for long enough to know, my assumption was culture was an event. I
Right.
need to
Yeah.
pull something off, but what you're really advocating for is it's a framework. It's an OS. It's an operating system that we're actually loading in. It's not that we can, hey, we're going to have our company picnic, right? We're going to have our staff beach day, and we can now say that we have a good culture, and we're going to be Christian best place to work type of
That's
awards,
right.
right? So, what's the difference? How do we actually begin to implement that?
Yeah. Love that question. And you nailed it in that it is an operating system. And those events can be part of that. But I think we've tended to just expect that the event would be the thing that, takes care of our culture. And rarely does that occur. Because in some cases it feels forced or contrived, because it's kind of this outlier in everybody's daily experience, right? So the, here's my why on this, and then I'll answer the how a little bit. But uh, every major initiative we do in ministry, we typically have a plan for your mission, your vision. You've spent time, energy, resources, days crafting, mission and vision of like, who are we and where are we headed? We'll spend a crazy amounts of money in strategic planning, hiring people to come in and help us build a strategic plan for then how do we achieve that mission. But our people are really the linchpin between those two things. And it's often what we miss. And so just like every other key initiative needs a plan, our people, we need a plan for how we're stewarding our people. And that's one of the ways I look at culture is it's the stewardship of people in pursuit of a plan of our mission, right? It's a stewardship of the people that God has assembled here to help us achieve this mission. We've got to be purposeful for how we're stewarding them. So then we get real purposeful. We look at that hierarchy of needs and say, okay, where are the gaps? And so there's a whole, the framework kind of unpacks, okay, what's going on at each levels of the hierarchy. And then we look at just a simple tool we call the employee journey grid, where at every stage of an employee's engagement with us, and you could look at this for volunteers as well, so you can parallel this, but from, when we think employees, it's from the interviewing process to the hiring process to our onboarding to our weekly meeting rhythms to our performance plans and reviews to our events and staff of events and fun days to how people exit, which you and I've talked about how critical those transitions out are and how much they shape culture. So at every point of an employee's journey, we're looking for how are we reinforcing who we are and how we work together to achieve our mission. And so there's a number of things that you're clarifying. You're bringing clarity. Clarity to me is a chief indicator of the health of a culture. The clearer we are as leaders in communicating who we are, how we work together, the more equipped team members are to more deeply engage. And so you're looking for, at every one of those key points, the rhythms that we already have within our organization. So I'm not suggesting you insert another system. I'm saying you get this clarity of your culture, like what's the definition of your culture? And then you say, in all of our regular rhythms of organizational life, how are we reinforcing that? How are we making sure that as people are coming onto our staff, that they are really getting onboarded to the values that guide how we do everything here? Instead of just assuming they'll catch it, we're purposely, and I had a class in one of the teams that I served on called Culture Shock. And so if you are brand new to our staff, and this was one of the churches that I served at, if you were brand new to our staff, you did 6 lunches with a different executive team leader, and we walked you through our values. We told you stories. We gave you the insider language and backstory on things that had shaped our culture over the years. Like, we just brought you into, hey, you're in the inner circle. Here's all the backstory you need to know. Here's the values that guide us. When you hear this phrase, use your blinker, it means, hey, you need to communicate a little bit better. Like, we need more communication about that thing, right? So it was like this real intentional process to say, we want to make sure every team member gets caught up to who we are and how we work together. And then in our staff meetings, we're reinforcing those in different ways. Sometimes we do shout outs and, call out people who are living into our values. Sometimes we would just do a deep dive and study on what we were doing as a team. And then we would look for in our annual staff events, what are we doing and how are we reinforcing the best of who we are? And so it's really being purposeful to say, those things already exist. You have your rhythms of organizational life, the things that employees are doing day in and day out. How are you connecting the dots and ensuring that you're reinforcing, what we look like at our best? That's one of my favorite ways to define culture is, what do we look like at our best? And have we put language and clarity to that helps everybody know how to hit that target?
So somebody's listening right now and they say, I want that. I know we're not there, but I'm going to have a whole team just to implement it. It feels big and it feels
Yeah,
overwhelming. I think some people might be listening to this and they think, well, what's the ROI? Some people
mm,
might even be listening and they're saying, look, we have a ministry to run and this feels like we're just coddling the staff. Why do we need to can we just get to the actual ministry part so that we're not working on all of this infrastructural, so help speak to a little bit of that devil's advocate of the resistance even in our hearts as we're listening.
sure.
Why this is important. How do you actually do this while still doing ministry?
Great question. My simple answer is patience and persistence, because culture change is behavior change. So um, we have to be patient and persistent with the process. But let me respond to that with a story of a organization that I worked with in the past 2 years. And they came to me because they had had significant turnover. I think 2/3 of their staff had um, departed in the last 2 years. So they had had massive turnover. they could find reasons for most of them, like kind of to excuse it away, but it really came down to their board saying something's off. Like we got to dig into this. Why are we having such extreme turnover with our staff?
Mm.
So the board actually instigated having myself and our team come in. And so we did our survey process, which is the assessment phase of like, hey, let's try to uncover what's going on inside of this culture. It turned out there was a lot of mistrust of leadership, like high mistrust of leadership. And so we dug a little bit deeper to trying to find out what's going on and what's the root of it. Because the reality was the senior leadership team were wonderful people. And in fact, the staff had high trust for them, their character as humans. But what it came down to is they didn't trust their competency. They didn't trust their decision making. They didn't have good information to know why decisions were being made. They started to question people would just disappear almost, when, people, whether, and everything was, there was always a little bit of mystery around all the transitions. So the staff who stayed were starting to have more fear of, I don't know why people are leaving. I don't know, so of course they're getting more and more fearful and skeptical. And then it's creating that continued distrust in the organization. Now, this is a little bit more of an extreme case, but it happened over time. It wasn't like this was an overnight thing. It was like this gradual progression. And then they found themselves in this really unhealthy spot. So to get a little bit to answer your question, they had such turnover. They were barely pulling, and this was a church, they barely were pulling off Sundays, right? Like they were barely, so was ministry happening? Yes, but it was a slog, right? Like it was like they had this revolving door of team members. They were trying to get new team members onboarded. And so they weren't doing ministry with great momentum and joy. And, it was like they were just kind of slogging through it. And so we did our work, we dug in, went through the process, and they have almost little to no turnover now. The trust level, they just did their staff survey and they were 13 percentage points up from the previous year, which, in survey land is a big jump in engagement. And the testimonials that they're getting from the staff saying, now they have more clarity, they have more understanding. They've been intentional about process, and the whole time ministry is happening, but they had to kind of give a little more intentional time in this season to say, hey, time out. Something is not healthy and we've got to dig into it to help us get back on track. Now, again, that's not always the case with everybody, but you know what it feels like. Most of us are not leading ministry staffs with hundreds of people, and most of us, if a team member leaves, you immediately feel it, right? Like everybody else has to absorb more responsibility. Hiring is beastly right now. Like, I don't know about most of your listeners, but it's not just a quick fill when you're looking for a new student pastor or a children's pastor or whatever it might be. It's like, those are hard positions to fill. And so the toll on your team, when a position is open, not to mention the cost, it costs us 2 to 3 times the salary when somebody leaves. And so when you have regular turnover, there's extra costs. So the whole thing is saying, hey, the more intentional you are with the culture, the more clearly we've defined it, the more people understand that and are living into it, and we're realizing the benefits of it, the less turnover you have. And so you actually get more momentum towards ministry because you're retaining that institutional knowledge. You have team members that actually want to be together. They're working together rather than working against each other. And so you feel that momentum that you might not otherwise be feeling if your culture is just okay. Right? So I may have gone on a tangent there, Matt, and not really gotten to your question, but you can do a follow-up.
That's good. No, you opened up a door, though, that I was headed towards. So, and I want you to talk about the Culture Matters Summit in a second. But one of the things that I spoke on for that is coming up is that we feel what we've seen in pastoral transitions is there's this missing link that we spend a lot of time building out our culture, and then we let somebody go in the worst possible way. And what you were just saying was we forget that everybody else is watching. And so we have declarations like this is a very warm, open, friendly staff environment, and you can come to us with anything, and we want to be open, transparent, and honest, except when we let somebody go.
Mm-hmm.
And when that
Mm-hmm.
happens, we have a lot more questions than answers. It feels like that transparency is gone. All of a sudden, doors are starting to close and there's whispers in the hallway. And
Right.
we have seen this because of the people that we get to talk to, that there's a tremendous amount of hurt that undermines all of the other work that we're doing. How have you seen that just play out in the
Yeah.
culture world? Why
Yeah.
do transitions matter?
Yeah. Such a great, I mean, honestly, I feel like it has outsized influence on your culture if your process, like you just described for when employees exit, if there's no clarity of process, and it just leaves all these question marks, it actually is such a um, it hurts your culture so significantly, because again, it creates all the, because what is our biggest question? What does it mean for me? So if somebody leaves and I don't know why, I'm wondering, is there anything I need to be worried about? Am I doing
Mm,
anything wrong? Like,
right.
why did my, like, what? So you have all these questions that you don't have answers for. And so it's really important that leaders are conscious of that. What happens in exits significantly impacts how people feel about their organization. So here's
Mm,
some of my coaching. Matt, you've probably got better coaching on this as well. But my encouragement when I'm working on culture plans with the organizations we serve, as we look at that employee journey and we get to the exiting, when people are offboarding, people are going to leave. That's part of just the nature of, not everything is forever. And so there are going to be transitions. We hope people stay a really long time, but when they do move on, we recognize that, God may be moving them on to something different. They might not have just been the best fit here. We can have all kinds of reasons for that. But we need to first make sure that how we facilitate exits is congruent with the values we've declared. So we've defined, hey, here's the values that guide how we work together. Well, how are those, and preemptively saying, how are those going to show up when people are exiting? If we say that we're a staff that cares for one another,
mm,
well, is that value showing up when people exit? And what would that look like? And so making sure you're thinking about that before you get to that point. Another thing that I've coached organizations on is, again, looking at that employee journey grid, looking at the offboarding process and saying, okay, we need to define a process for how people exit our organization and who gets communicated what and when.
mm.
And we let our staff know that before we're right in the middle of somebody's transition, right? So it's like, because there's a level of understanding that not everybody on the staff needs to know all the reasons why everybody left, or somebody's leaving, because that might be personal to them. It may or may not be fully appropriate to know all the details, but we have to demonstrate that there's a process, and here's what you can expect. If you're not meeting expectations in your job performance, then here's what we will do, and that might include, you have a performance plan, or you get some coaching, or whatever you want to define. You need to define a process. If somebody's not meeting expectations, here's how we handle that. And if for some reason you still can't meet the expectations, then here's a transition plan, and when people transition, here's how we handle it. If somebody disqualifies themselves from ministry because of personal choices or something, here's how we will handle that. And you
Mm,
define, those 2 or 3 ways that people will exit your organization. And you explain to your team, here's what's happening. But when those things happen, recognize that sometimes we won't be able to communicate all of the details, but we can assure you that these are the plans that we follow. And what you're doing in that is you're saying, hey, we have a plan, we will follow the plan. And while we won't be able to necessarily tell you every detail along the way, hopefully you've built enough trust that they recognize, because you have a plan, it's congruent with your values, that they can be at ease that you followed the plan. Now there's, we have to actually follow the plan, but by having a plan before you get to those exit points, it helps team members know, okay, I know there's a plan. I know that there's a way we do this, and even though I can't be a part of every detail, I can trust that this is how we do things here. I'd love to
Yeah,
hear what you add to that, Matt, in your
yeah.
coaching.
No, that's really good. Ours is proprietary, so I'm not going to show it to you. I'm just kidding.
I'm
uh,
just sending them to you.
yeah, no, that's great. Well, I think the reason that we started Pastoral Transitions was we kept seeing that the church is really good at saying hello and not really good at saying goodbye.
Yeah,
And
that's
so, if we
right.
can actually do that with love and grace, on even on the way out, that we're gonna, for our small slice of the pie, that we're gonna be able to help in those kingdom matters. I'm curious from your perspective because you get to see the kingdom and how we're doing this within our organizations, whether it's churches, nonprofits, Christian higher ed. These are some of these place mission organizations. Um, how are we? Like, the assumption is that Christians should be doing this better than anybody else on earth. That we follow the golden rule of we love others as we love ourselves. But are we keeping up with Chick-fil-A and Disney? Or from your perspective, is there a struggle, more of a struggle? Or do you see from where the church is at, do we need a lot of work in this area?
I I think we need a lot more intentionality in this area. I think that we have a desire to do this well because, again, we tend to be quite relational in the church and we do love people and we want to love people. But I think oftentimes we, I said earlier that culture is one of the definitions is stewardship of people in pursuit of a mission. And I think sometimes in church we forget, and this is my conviction, but I think our staff is our first congregation, right? Like they are the first, group that we get to shepherd and steward and um, influence and support, and then how they're cared for cascades to the rest of the congregation because they are serving the rest of the congregation. And granted, I'm not saying you're not shepherding the rest of the congregation, but I really think a lot of times pastors or senior leaders in ministry skip over the staff. We kind of see them as a cog in the machine to do ministry. Like I know that sounds really simplistic,
Mm.
um, but we miss the significance of how to care for and shepherd our staff team. And honestly, I'm seeing corporate do this really well. There's a guy named Matthew Kelly who wrote a book, I think, called The Culture Solution. And he says, culture, not strategy, finance, technology, industry knowledge, culture is the competitive advantage of our age. So here's a guy who's talking to the marketplace and he's saying, people are the point. And you would think in the business world, of course, strategy, finance, technology, industry knowledge, all those things would be the things that they're focused on. And they are because the bottom line still really matters in the corporate world. But this conversation in the corporate world is almost like, duh, yeah, of course, you've got to focus on culture. But in ministry, I find myself having to convince leaders that just because you love your team and you give them a hug and a pat on the back, you're not intentionally building the infrastructure that gives them the support to really flourish inside of your organization. And that's really the heart of culture. So going back to that, we need a strategy, we need an operating system for culture. And I think that feels foreign. I think we struggle sometimes with systems related to people because they feel like it feels like it's not relational or we're not leading from the heart. But sometimes the most important thing we can do to serve people well is give a system that helps them understand how we operate. Right? It makes it ensures that like people don't fall through the cracks because we've built a system intentionally to support how we want to steward our team.
Yeah, I work with couples from time to time, and I always think it's funny that the honey-do list that guys get remains the long list because a lot of times it's not that the guy doesn't want to do it; it's he doesn't really know how. And so we have a little
Yeah.
bit of this like checklist of like, if fix the screen door is on that list, and I want to, but I don't know what to do to make that happen. sometimes we need somebody to come alongside us and say, let me show you how. And sometimes it needs to be outsourced. And we have to
Mhm.
say, we're getting the screen door expert to be able to come in.
That's
I
good.
want you to plug a few things, not because you just exchange time with us and we're going to give you your shot, but I actually literally want people to be involved with what you're doing, because I think that the better that people are, the more intentionality that we put in building good, healthy staff cultures, the less that we will need to come in and clean up more messes. Which we're actually not in this to be business like strategy. We want to blow up, pastoral transitions. I'd rather have us be non-existent, and then we do other things. But um, uh, before I do that, though, I'm just curious too, because this podcast is called Life After Ministry, and I just want you, this is a little bit of a curveball in different direction, but you have a life after ministry experience.
Mm.
And obviously you're still in ministry, but you were in full-time vocational ministry.
Right. Right.
And we talk to a lot of people who are trying to figure out, like, well, if I'm not in the church, if I'm not a pastor, what am I going to do? And I'm just curious about that transition for you of how did
Mm.
you go from being on staff at a church to saying, I'm going to start something that's going to
Right.
actually help serve the church, and I don't have to be a pastor, but I can actually still do ministry. What went into that
Yeah.
transition for
Yeah. Great question. And I might be a little unique in that I didn't expect to be in ministry originally full
you?
time. I mean, I mostly grew up in church. My family came to faith when I was pretty young. And so I say I grew up in the church, but I also was old enough to know how significant following Jesus and becoming a part of a church was in the trajectory of our family story. So, like, the local church is deeply meaningful to me because I saw how it impacted my family. So I've always been deeply involved in the local church, but I didn't have aspirations to be on ministry staff until my husband and I were a part of planting the church back in Nashville. And so I kind of accidentally found myself on ministry staff. And so then I spent another 12 years between two different churches. And and I remember when I was considering leaving the second church. And at that point, I was speaking and writing and getting opportunities to serve other organizations and ministries. And I was kind of wrestling through that idea to leave church, because once you've been in full time ministry, it kind of feels like you're supposed to stay in full time ministry. It kind of feels like, I think there's like this subtlety of like you've arrived, it's like the highest calling. And I had to wrestle through that because, and what I began to find is that, God entrusts us with the gifts that He's given us, the places that He's put us, and that responsibility to steward those things. And in one of my books, I talk about how, we're the gifts, the experience, the talents, the opportunities that we have. Our job is to really like look at that and say, okay, God, what do you want me to do with all of this? And that's what I did at that season. What I found was I was reflecting on the different places that He had me. And I always felt like He called me to specific visions for a season. Like there was always so when I was in the record business to when I went on staff at the church in Nashville to the next church that I went to, it was always a distinct sense of calling to a vision, like what God was doing in that specific team or that specific community. And that was the pivot point for me when I stepped out of full-time ministry and started Foresight, was this recognition that there was a vision that I felt like God had for me in this season of my life to serve leaders and teams, in ministries, nonprofits, businesses, but leaders who are people of faith, to help them steward their talent well so that we can stay on mission. And God just kind of clearly gave me that vision for what this era of leadership looks like for me. And that's where I am now.
And it's not easy to start something ex nihilo, right? Out of nothing.
No,
It's to
it's
like
awful.
to encourage people, right? Like I find myself telling people like, yeah, it's just scary. It's scary to start it.
It's
And,
terrifying.
years in, it's still scary, right? Like
Yeah, for
just
sure.
kind of
You're
to lean in
always,
and trust Jesus.
yeah, I mean, I feel like my prayer life in
Mhm.
leading an organization is probably stronger than it's ever been, because
Yeah.
it's just that recognition that, and I was in a functionally an executive pastor role for those years in ministry. And so I was very attuned to Do we have the right resources coming in? Can we pay everybody? It's like the money doesn't just magically appear for you to pay payroll, but there's something when you're getting a W-2 check from an
Right.
organization that you feel like some sense of safety and security. And then you launch your own thing and you're literally every week praying for God's provision and the right connections and opportunities. And it's kind of put me closer to this recognition that God really is our provider, that stay faithful to the work that he's called you to, and seeking him for provision. And so it's been a new part of my faith journey to launch and lead something myself.
Yeah. So you hear that, people. If you're listening, you're like, but it feels scary. It feels overwhelming. It is. It
It
absolutely
is.
is. But if the Lord's calling you, he'll provide for you in all of that. Jenni, you lead the Foresight Group. You have a book coming out next month, and we are getting this out real quick, this episode of the podcast, because tomorrow, by the time everyone hears this, tomorrow, there is a summit coming out. So can you just tell us about all of those? And we'll put links in there so you don't have to be writing
For
stuff
sure.
down, but tell
For
us.
sure. Yeah, for sure. Well, Matt, first of all, I'm really thrilled you're a part of the Culture Matters Summit is happening on Thursday, January 23rd. It's a half-day event with great leaders like yourself talking about the importance of organizational culture and how we do it, right? So you speak just really significantly to how we transition people and the impact of that and how that impacts our cultures. And then we have like Nona Jones speaking about the heart of our leadership and how that shapes culture, how that influences our team. We have Mark Miller, who is co-founder of Lead Every Day, also was a retired VP from Chick-fil-A, and he talks about 3 culture rules. He pulls out some statistics from the work that he did at Chick-fil-A around organizational culture. Just really good, helpful insights. Barna, Matt Randerson, VP of Barna, is sharing some newer research on well-being at work, like how our teams are doing from a well-being standpoint and things we need to know. Just so much good insight around how do we steward people? Like at the end of the day, this whole culture thing for me is just the fact that people are the point. Like we as leaders are in a place where we get to steward other, the gifts of the people that God has assembled to serve with us. Like we have that influence and that opportunity to steward the talent of those around us. And how do we do that aligned towards a shared vision and mission? So it's going to be it's free to you to register. So y'all just go to culturemattersummit.com, get registered, join us. It's going to be such a fantastic event. And then you'll hear more about the book at the summit, but culturemattersbook.com is where you can find all the resources, learn about the book, the framework, so much of what we've talked about today.
Yeah, and that's coming out next month. What is that, February 11th?
11th, yeah.
That's the drop date. So no easy task putting all that together, my goodness. And then really if you need help along the way in implementing and building out a healthy culture for your team, wherever that is, we have the Foresight Group. And that's where you're literally walking that through with an organization.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome.
Getforesight.com is our website. But, and you can just email me, Jenni, Jenni, at getforesight.com. Like we love to help leaders just unpack what does this look like and how do we steward our people well?
And she'll actually respond to you. It's not even some kind of bot or something.
That's true.
Well, Jenni, many, many big things coming up. We're so excited, and culture does matter. I'm thankful that you are a part of it. We're thankful to be partnered up with you in this. Thanks for sharing. And friends, go check all of this stuff out. Sign up. We can always be working on more of this to be not just great leaders, but we're building the kingdom when we do this well. So, Jenni, thanks so much.
Thank you, Matt.
In the end, how we treat people matters. I hope that as you listen to Jenni and the stories that she shared, the insight that she's given us, we really have to put people first. I mean, isn't that why we are in the kingdom business, right? If we can love each other well in the everyday, in the functioning together, we have to be able to do this well if we're going to make an impact for the kingdom. And so we're so thankful for the work that Jenni and her team are doing, and just encourage you to sign up for The conference, if you're listening to this in time, sign up for the conference that's taking place tomorrow on January 23rd. We'll have all the links in our show notes. You can go to our website, lifeafterministrypodcast.com, and we'll put it all in there. But continue to pay attention. How we treat people, not just in the everyday, but even in those transitions is one of the things that we're focused on. We want to love each other. We want to be able to be known by our love. So bless you. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode of the Life After Ministry podcast.